All right, well, so welcome. I'm Heather Simmons with the Washington Department of Ecology and committee member of the Columbia Basin Riparian Planting Partnership. Today, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, Gail Redberg. Gail is with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and manages their tribal native plant nursery. Gail credits her research of plant-fungal relationships in the ancient forests of the Cascades with her decision to enter resource conservation. Teaching and research continued to drive her goals to develop strategies for producing robust plants with increased survival capability in natural landscapes, including exploiting natural symbiotic relationships with bacteria and fungi, and developing protocols for culturally sensitive plants to restore traditional gathering areas. Her recreational interests include horses, hiking, cross-country, skiing, scuba diving, and enjoying her grandchildren. So I'm going to hand it over to Gail, just to take a second. First, I have to find you. There you are. All right, so you should be able to share your slides now.
No.
Okay, my slides are underneath your thing.
Uh-oh.
Here we go. Here we go. Okay. All right. So glad to see so many names popping up. I recognized a couple. Hello to Jess and to Cheryl. And Cheryl, if I say anything that is not quite right, I hope you'll help me out during the question time. So here we go. I recently watched a webinar on reciprocal relationships with the land, and that got me to thinking about the partnership that we have with plants and animals, and of course, and all the other living and non-living aspects of this wonderful earth that we live on. So we'll just go ahead and get started on this.
Do I know? I don't know, B.
Living plants are an integral part of any riparian restoration project. They predict the future species composition of insect, birds, and wildlife inhabiting that space. Regarding plants as your living partners will aid in dedicating the necessary forethought required to have a successful project. And one of the reasons why I wrote that last part was that I know in dealing with habitat managers that many of them are fisheries biologists, and so their focus is on the restructuring of streams and of making good fish habitat. And so I like to encourage them to think about the plants as not just a necessary requirement for the project, but as something that will actually partner with them in establishing their goals for salmon restoration. So the tribal native plant nursery that I manage is owned by the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, which includes the Umatilla, Cayuse, and Walla Walla tribes. And these tribes have cultural traditions that they have taught and perpetuated a reciprocal relationship with the land for many generations. Survival, I mean, if any of you live on the east side, you know that survival in this climate is not nearly as easy as it is on the west side of the Cascades. So their survival depended on seasonal migrations to utilize the resources of the land. And I like this picture because one of our nursery crew members has a scaffold on near Celila Falls on the Columbia, and that her family has fished from for generations, and it's just, makes me feel in touch with not only the past but the present. The first foods policy that the tribes make their resource decisions based on are gifts from the Creator promised with a mandate for stewardship. And those include the water, salmon, elk, bison, and deer, the berries and roots. And all of these are symbols of each of these first foods. So the first foods tradition, again, demonstrates this reciprocal relationship with the land. Maintaining pure, clear, cold water provided the perfect conditions for the salmon returning to the Columbia and its tributaries to lay their eggs. And the salmon were a predictable, nutritious source of protein that could be dried and stored through the severe winters. There are seasonal indicators, as this poster from the Nez Perce tribe shows. And if you look at this poster, it's divided up into the months of the year, and the plants that are prominent during those months, whether they be, treating the roots or looking at the blooms and knowing what is fish are going to be soon coming up the river. It's all intertwined. So between the salmon migrations, the people traveled to the Blue Mountains and beyond to harvest roots, berries, elk, deer, pronghorn, and bison. To time their journeys, people looked to indicator plants that bloomed at certain times. Roots and bulbs such as couch and camas were dried for the winter, and berries and fruit such as huckleberry and choke cherries were pounded into venison or salmon to make pemmican. And these show the blooms of both the couch and the camas and their roots. Tules gave a waterproofing insulation covering for lodges, mats, and burial coverings. And hemp dogbane provided fiber to make clothing and fishing nets. And those fishing nets were actually strong enough to capture the giant sturgeons of the Columbia River, which is pretty amazing. But it does take a long time to make fiber netting from dogbane. So I like to think of the Tribal Native Plant Nursery as being in the center of this circle of the first foods, the river vision that the tribe has established in creating healthy salmon habitat for the streams. And then the roots and berries that are enjoyed and involve community participation, even with the very young. Our people at the nursery, around the sides are those of us who are there year-round, and in the top middle, we frequently have youth employment during the summertime, which always infuses us with a little bit of energy and fun. Our friends, the chokecherry and berries and fruit on the left side of the screen, Douglas spirea in the middle, and serviceberry and fruit and blossoms on the right. Arrowleaf balsam root up at the upper left-hand corner, golden currant in the middle, Oregon grape upper right, and Douglas maple down in the lower right. And then we have snowberries on the left and ninebark. These two plants are really favorites of mine for restoration. The snowberry, although I think the only thing that eats those berries are rodents, is a very essential plant because it propagates by rhizomes. And so it holds soil well for bank stabilization. And it also is great for reducing erosion and invasive species. And the 9-bark down on the right-hand side is just such a versatile plant and so resourceful. I see it growing everywhere. It's on our exposed, on my property in the Blue Mountains. On the west, we have a west-facing slope that gets full sun. And it grows along that slope. And we have, and then I've seen it growing right down along riverbanks. In the nursery, it's one of the most forgiving plants as far as watering too little or too much. It seems to be able to survive most anything. When its leaves get all dried up and brown and crinkly in the middle of a drought, if you get some rain, pretty soon you see green leaves popping out of those stems again. So it's an admirable plant. So when we partner with plants, we have 5 questions, 5 general questions: why, where, when, what, and how. And these next couple slides are kind of boring, but they're important. First of all, why is it that we're doing a planting? Some of our reasons may be to stabilize stream banks, increase shade, and increase insect habitat, to eradicate invasive species, to maintain that space with native plants, to increase plants diversity and numbers to enhance ecosystems, to provide certain wildlife species with appropriate forage, and that includes insects and birds as well as 4-legged beasts, to return culturally significant species to the land where they have disappeared entirely or are very rare, to create a low-maintenance xeric landscape, attract wildlife or pollinators to your property, to stabilize soil and reduce opportunistic invasives after an event such as fire or flooding. So the where is this planting going to occur? And these are all important considerations. What is your latitude and your elevation? Those 2 numbers will determine whether or not the plants that you are putting in are from the appropriate seed source. They have to be able to be of a similar latitude and elevation for the greatest opportunity for long-term success. Precipitation, temperatures, and wind exposure. The amount of, I know that in some areas in the Walla Walla area, precipitation varies greatly just within a few miles. But the temperature, and even the temperatures are quite a bit different. Where I live at 3,200 elevation, during the summertime, it's about 10 degrees cooler than down the valley floor. During the wintertime, it's oftentimes warmer because of inversion events. Wind exposure has a huge effect on plants. Wind pulls moisture out of the leaves and will dry up plants faster than almost anything else. And that's something to also remember when you're transporting your plants too. Water table, how high is your water table? Some plants don't like their roots to be involved in saturated soils and a high water table, and they won't do well at all. And at the other extreme, we have to get our cuttings down to the water table, or at least stick them at a time when they can grow enough roots to reach the water table before drought comes. What is the aspect of your project site? South facing and west facings are always the most severe. North and east are much more temperate and easier to plant on. Is there any available shade? With some restoration projects that the tribes have done on Meacham Creek, for example, we planted up there for several years, and there was such a drastic restructuring of the stream that a lot of the available shade was removed and used during the stream beds restructuring itself. So in cases like that, you have to find your shade where you can get it. Sometimes it requires just finding a big rock that you can put a plant to the north of, or you know, a piece of shade cloth that you have attached to a giant staple that you can put in the ground to the south. Soil composition. Is the soil cobbly? Is it sandy? Is it heavy clay? All of these are considerations as to what kinds of plants will do well there, and also as to how drought will affect those plants through the summer. The soil depth, is it very thin soil, or do you have quite a reservoir of soil to hold water? And then, is there any available irrigation for your at least the very first summer and into the second summer, if at all possible, until those roots can get established? And when? This is a really important consideration. Oftentimes projects, the timetable is very narrow, and the narrower the timetable, the less flexibility there is in your plant choice. So the span of time between now and the target date of when you plant is an important concept. And so you are going to, if you want your plants to be locally adapted, to use locally adapted seed, if you can start making arrangements even 3 years in advance, that's best. If you don't have your contract until June and the planting is required to be done that September or October, then you are pretty much, you're just going to be getting whatever is available, what you can find. When will permitting and infrastructure be done? I know that oftentimes holds up projects. When will contractors be available for installation? When will the desired plants be available? If you're planting, if your prescription calls for 5-gallon plants, those take time to grow. So even 1-gallon plants take at least 2 years generally. And some plants are so slow growing that even though they're only in a cone, they've required 3 years to be able to fill out that little 10 cubic inch cone. So the timing is very important. Also, what time of year you're going to be planting. Many people prefer the fall. It gives the plants an opportunity to establish their roots during more temperate periods during the winter before they hit the drought of spring and summer. And some people prefer spring planting. And also, what is your time of day that you're going to be planting? Sometimes if you're planting late in the fall, you can't get started first thing in the morning because the ground is frozen. But if you wait for an hour or two, that softens up and you can get things accomplished. Okay, so what is your stock type going to be? And what size will it be? Of course, the smallest stock type are the seeds, and then we have cuttings up in the top center picture, bare root to the top right, containerized plants, the small cones, 10 cubic inch cones in the center, and then a gallon pot down on the right hand side. What species are suitable to the site? And you may have a site that is quite varied, that has many microsites that will be able to provide the right conditions for certain kinds of plants that they wouldn't be able to survive in a different location on that same project site. What equipment will you need? You have to think about what you're going to be digging into. As I think back on those projects on Meacham Creek, it was a very large cobble that was tightly bound to one another. You couldn't see any soil at all. And we found the best equipment was a kind of like a pry bar, a dibble bar. Seeds do encapsulate the wisdom of millennia. The DNA located inside of those seeds has been modified through the centuries by the location in which they grew. And so if you are purchasing plants that have been produced in the wild and have produced the seeds that those plants are grown from, that are near your project site, then you can be pretty certain that those plants will have adapted to the climatic and soil conditions of your site. With climate change, those rules that we've established over the last century are still in the process of being modified. So one thing is that you can do is to mix in with your plantings some plants that are from a little bit drier location than what you have locally. Just some pictures of our crew collecting seeds. Believe it or not, that's a giant service berry that Brandy and Marie are picking from, and you see it's very healthy. It's growing right out in the open. It is on the edge of the railroad, so it does get a little bit of runoff of water from that, and also from the highway. And then Emily is picking, looks like she's looking at 9-bark there. She's got some ocean spray in the background. Cuttings are, if you are thinking about using cuttings and you don't know very much about them, there is a lot of information online about the best time of year, whether you want dormant cuttings or softwood cuttings or semi-hard cuttings, depending on your project type and when your construction will be done. When you're able to put those cuttings in the soil will depend on what kind of cuttings you're using. You can't store cuttings for a long period of time. So if they're harvested in, let's say, December, then you want to be able to use them, and they're kept in a cooler, that you want to be able to use them by March would be the best, and they can possibly be good until June. Semi-hardwood are not able to be stored as long, and softwood cuttings you can't store at all. You have to stick them immediately after you harvest them. How will you acquire your plants? How will you install the plants? How will you reduce invasive species from encroaching? And how will you reduce herbivory? Those are all really important questions. I put a little dibble bar there. That I love those tools. They're heavy, which is nice when you're working in rocks, and you don't use them like a jackhammer. You just find a little edge and pry underneath the rocks. The nursery also has experienced some herbivory. We got this little rabbit pair that came in and chowed down on our 700 gallons of Douglas hawthorn. So they were in a house that had several different species. They didn't touch any of the different species, but they loved Douglas hawthorn. using dibble bars and shovels to outplant sagebrush that we raised for the sage grouse initiative. This was in the Steens Mountains in, I think, the first week of April. And we had wind and snow about every half hour. It was miserable. Okay, before we get into invasive species, are there any questions that people would have so far?
If anyone would like to ask any questions, you can enter them in the chat box. Meanwhile, I have a question for you.
Okay.
I've noticed as a grant manager, I've noticed that our project managers often pick between one of two scenarios, either fewer larger stock plants or lots and lots and lots of smaller plants. What do you think some of the considerations might be when deciding which strategy is appropriate for a particular site?
So the advantage of a larger stock plant is that they've already developed a pretty significant root structure, and they also have a fair amount of soil in the container that helps them along. So if you're planting out into a site that has heavy cobble, like I've discussed already, we actually started doing all 2 10 cubic inch cones in those plantings. The first 2 or 3 years, we put a lot of those in, thousands and thousands. Mm-hmm. And I think it was 25,000 the first year, and the 2 years after that was a little bit less, but we had very, very high mortality. There just wasn't enough soil on that site to support anything in a cone. So the more severe the site, I would say the better off you are with a larger plant. You can kind of use that as a rule of thumb. And when I say severe, I'm basically talking about the soil's ability to hold moisture, because those sagebrush cones that we planted out in the Steens Mountains, they get pretty high temperatures there and very cold in the wintertime, and there's no trees for shade at all. But those plants are doing really well. They have good soil.
So someone asked about the Steens sage planting and how you addressed browse protection for sagebrush. Was that an issue?
This was on a ranch that had, it's a very large ranch. It's like 200,000 acres, I think. And they rotate their pastures. So the one site, I think that those pictures were taken from, was going to be grazed 2 years in advance of that. I mean, after that planting. The other site that we planted at, we actually had an exclosure for that, for one of those plantings. We had 3 different sites we planted on. I think 2 of them, we were hoping that they'd be protected by just the rotational grazing, and the other one we did have a large exclosure.
Are you referring to livestock, excluding livestock?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any native ungulate browse pressure or anything like that?
I haven't been back to monitor that. It was being monitored by the Forest Service, and I know they went I think it was in June after the first planting, and then later in the fall, but I haven't heard the results of the fall yet.
Okay. Any other questions that folks would like to ask? I did have a question about I really like that Nez Perce season round poster. Is that something that can be ordered or purchased?
Yeah, I think so. I felt a little bit weird about using that because I didn't ask permission.
Oh.
Sorry.
It's okay.
But it's really good. So
Well, maybe we could send out information about that if you know where we could order that or.
yeah, I just looked on. I think that just came from their website, the Nespers website.
I might look into that, and if
Yeah.
folks are interested, I can let them know. That's a really nice poster.
Yes.
So if there's no other questions, we can continue.
Okay, so invasive species. So it's, you know, when you're doing planting, all these questions can be really overwhelming. So I apologize for that. I'm just thinking back to when I first started and so many different considerations to have during, you know, to do a successful restoration planning. And sometimes you just don't have the time. So I don't want you all to feel guilty if you don't have time to consider all these things, but the further you go along that path, the more intuitive it will become. And some of you are probably old experts and this is just way too basic. But anyway, here we go. So you need to identify the kinds of invasives that that particular site is prone to having. And when you're thinking about those specific invasives, you want to pay attention to how they reproduce and when they reproduce. So if they reproduce by rhizomes, that's like reed canary grass. That's a very, very difficult plant to eradicate. And with all invasives, if you can get them, you know, if you see them starting to creep into your area, you want to get them right away before they have a chance to either go to seed or to establish rhizomes in the soil. So figure out how they reproduce and when. And that's going to be important. So for example, up at the top center, we have cheatgrass. And, you know, it's an annual grass that is one of the very first grasses to start coming up out of the soil in the spring. It matures quickly, it sets seed quickly. And so the only thing that you can do to outcompete it is to have a perennial grass that also comes up early and sets its seed early. And so Sandberg's bluegrass is a really good example of that and has been quite effective. Other kinds of plants can, lomatium can be helpful in outcompeting cheatgrass as well. And I know that there are a lot of different research studies going on right now about different kinds of biological applications for cheatgrass, including bacteria and fungi. Below them, we have the Himalayan blackberry. And I mean, I grew up on the west of the coastal range, and we battled that for always. That was our, and it's quite difficult here as well. So that's something that you just have to keep after all of the time. I'm not going to go into specific strategies for each of these because that's a whole nother talk, but so where are they successful? Like what kinds of things allow that invasive to be more competitive than the native plants? That's what I think of when I think of where are they successful. So with cheatgrass, thin soils are really help. I mean, they're able to do their job. They're able to get the moisture out of the soil before the season advances far enough for that soil to dry out and to reproduce. And so that's where you're going to have your issues with that type of plant. What species can outcompete them? I've talked a little bit about the Sandberg's bluegrass. That would be also true for the star thistle that's down in the right-hand corner, and for the medusa head that's up at the top. And can you use a broadleaf spray as a pre-treatment? So here's a failure story. We have a bank, about a 60-foot bank that's steep enough that you really don't want to take a tractor on it at all. And it has a lot of star thistle on it. So we sprayed the bank, but some things were happening that didn't allow us to come in and reseed. And so we got rid of the star thistle, which was great. But the very next year, Medusa head came in. And the Medusa head you can't spray with a broadleaf because it's grass. And so it's much more complicated to get rid of. Another question is, can you follow it up with a direct seeding? Oh, but just getting back to this broadleaf, if you're planting shrubs if you're planning on planting shrubs in that area, if you can use a broadleaf to get rid of your invasive species the year before you plant, then after you plant, your shrubs you won't have to use a broadleaf, therefore you won't have to worry about protecting your shrubs. Do you have a maintenance plan? Lots of times we don't realize how long it takes to actually get rid of all the plants that have their seeds already banked in that soil. It's like 5 to 7 years for many, and probably more for certain kinds. So to have a successful planting, it's never too early to start planting. Start communicating with native plant nurseries as soon as possible, even before you know exactly what you want, because there will be people there that can help you make in your decision making and can guide you as to the stock size that you should be using, or how long it's going to take to produce certain stock sizes, and the various attributes of species that might be helpful at your site. So ask questions. Discuss the container types and sizes. Right now, we grow in a 10 cubic inch cone, a 19 cubic inch, we call them stubbies. They're wider and shorter. We do some 30 and 40 cubic inch deep pots, deep cones, and then we use a 414 tree pot, and I should have had a slide that had all of these container sizes, but anyway, and then just round pots, like round gallons, round 2 gallons, round 5 gallons. But I had a customer come to me and say, we're going to be planting in 2 years on this site that has very thin soil. We really like the tree pot. We like how it trains the roots to grow down instead of the round pots where they end up circling the pot. But we can't plant a 414 tree pot container there, because that 414 means it's 4 inches across at the top. They're square at the top, and then they taper down, and they're 14 inches deep, which is great if you have the soil because it gets those roots down there a long ways. But if your soil is thin, it's not so great. So we started this conversation early enough that I'm able to order a pot that is just like the tall pot, except it's only 9 inches deep. And so I'm just bringing up this illustration to let you know that nurseries will work with you to a certain degree, and so you don't have to necessarily be bound by the things that they traditionally plant in if you have a site that really requires something different. And then as your plan for your projects develops, keep the nursery in the loop. So oftentimes there will be kinks that occur, along the way. Maybe you don't get the permissions and the that you need when you need them. Get all your paperwork signed, and sometimes that causes your window of construction then becomes too narrow, and you can't even complete the project, the infrastructure project, the part of the project that planting season. So it's extended into another year. You really need to communicate with your nursery if you're having issues, because they need to know if they should go ahead, depending on the size of plants and what kind of stock they have, if they should go ahead and find buyers for those plants and start over another year so that your plants are at the target size when you plant them, or just what kinds of decisions need to be made. After you've made an order, update the nursery with any changes. I think I already discussed that. Give advance notice before picking up plants. And advance notice means, not just the day before. It's really helpful if you let the nursery know even a month in advance, kind of your general target time. Nurseries, if you're planting in the fall, nurseries are getting their stock ready for winter. And so it's just much more convenient for them if they know which plants are going to be picked up when, and they can factor that into where they're putting their overwinter stock. So Marie is singing to the sage here. I think those are some of the sage that went out to Roaring Springs Ranch in the Steens Mountains. And she takes care of our seeds. You can see on the right here, we've done some work with ebb and flow pools and boxes, and we're not entirely satisfied with it, but they're very good for cottonwoods, nine bark, willows, alder, plants that require a lot of water. The pots that you can see with the cottonwood and the nine bark here are tall pots. All you're seeing is the top 4 inches. Those trays that they're sitting in are about 10 inches deep. And here's just some pictures of our outdoor growing areas. We also have pot fields that we use overhead irrigation in, and 3 greenhouses that we grow in. The 10 cubic inch cones are those yellow cones you see in the racks on the right-hand picture. And then the rest of those are all in tall pots. We frequently will ship our tall pots in round 5-gallon pots and keep the trays back at the nursery. And here's a crew. This was the LeGrand crew taking their plants out to their project site. It's always love to see our plants go out the door. So no matter what the challenge is, remember that there's always a new dawn and a new season. And got Steve here with his hat mask for coronavirus. So are there any other questions?
Someone asked, they mentioned they were concerned about the use of herbicides in riparian areas, and are they the necessary? Is that necessary to attack invasives like reed canary grass?
I know that there are some herbicides that are listed for use near streams. I'm not really the person to ask that question. I'll bet that Cheryl could contribute. Cheryl, I'll put you on the spot here. could contribute some helpful answers to that, because they have a lot more experience with using herbicides than I do.
Yeah, I would just mention that Okanagan Highlands Alliance has done a pretty massive riparian, or excuse me, reed canary grass battle up in the Okanagan County, and haven't used it. They don't use any kind of herbicides or anything like that. Mostly mowing, just mowing and or physically removing. If you mow it enough, it doesn't remove it, but it knocks down its I guess size. It gets very very small and tiny, and then if you shade it at that point, plant stuff and shade it. They've been really successful that way, but it is a big job.
Have they tried any covering it with plastic at all?
Yeah, they got some really thick rubber mats from I think the nearby mine um, through a mitigation. But yeah, they did get some large black mats. But you can, if you use a really thick plastic works okay, but I do notice it kind of finds those little cracks and grows through. But it definitely helps. But yeah, they did that for their planting plots. They would cover them for a year or two even,
Right.
and then mow them quite a bit and then plant. So let's see. Someone asked, could you explain how the ebb and flow boxes work, and did you build them?
Yes, we did build them, and we used pressure treated 2x6s for the sides, and we basically just built them on top of pallets so that they could be moved. They're a little bit long. They're 12 feet long, so there's a kind of a gap in between the two pallets that we used, and that created issues later on because eventually they started sagging in the center. And when you're using this kind of thing, you want all of the plants in the box or in the pool to have the same experience. So if you have a sag in the middle, they're not. The ones in the middle are water isn't draining out and they're kind of just sitting with their roots in water, while the ones on the ends are getting really dried out. So I know that ebb and flow has become a much more popular technology in greenhouses, and you can actually buy ebb and flow pools that have drainage that drain into a central system, which is great if you can afford that. So we haven't been able to do that. So we also just use ditch fabric and put it on the ground, make sure our ground is really level, and then use like post, to form our sides. Just put the fabric up over the top of the posts. You have the downside of using ebb and flow is that you have to make sure that it gets, we have found that you have to make sure that it gets all drained out regularly. Otherwise the roots will grow out there. The roots won't experience the air pruning that they need to stay inside their containers, and so they'll grow out of the container, and then the plant doesn't really have a need to fill up the container mass with roots. They can sort of end up developing like straw-like roots, which they do. They look great when they're growing in the ebb and flow pool, but when you get ready to plant them outside, they're not so great. So it's just the water management part of it is the part that we find the most complicated, and we keep searching for other ways of managing that more efficiently, because we like the concept of not having a lot of water on our leaves. It reduces foliar issues, and it also saves water. So anyway, those are some of our issues, and so that's why we say, I mean, willows do really well, cottonwoods do really well, aspen do well. Alder, you have to really make sure that they get an opportunity for those air spaces to fill up again in the soil. And lime bark does really well.
Let's do one more question, and then I'll let you finish up, and we'll just save the rest of the questions to the end. Someone asked about Sandberg's bluegrass and whether when you're planting in invasives, do you plant from seed or you plant plugs? Is there pros and cons to either?
Plugs have a greater chance of survival than just direct seed. But if your conditions are good and if you have a large area, it's going to be difficult to manage that with plugs. I mean, it's going to cost a lot. So I would say use a combination, and that way you get, you have some plants that are going to be mature enough to start going to seed that very next season if you plant in the fall, and then you'll have your grasses that are coming up and taking up space, because you need to cover the soil space as well as to provide more seed for the soil. So I think a combination is good.
I know the Yakima Nation at least used to plant their seed because they had such expansive large areas to reseed. They'd use a direct seed drill that they had as sort of an attachment to a tractor.
Right.
So if you have access to that, that's definitely a way to reduce disturbance to other things that are growing, but plant a lot of seed over a large area.
Right. And a good resource for that is BFI Seeds. I think it might be Native Seeds Incorporated in Moses Lake, and they have had a lot of experience in reclamation, and so I always call them when I have questions about projects that require direct seeding.
Great. Okay, we'll save the rest of the questions to the end when you're done.
I'm actually, this is my last slide.
Oh. Well, perfect, because it's 1 o'clock, but
that's what I was thinking.
Okay. Well, we can certainly stick around if anybody has other questions. I have a couple on my list, but I'll let folks ask their questions before the end of lunch if you have any additional. Please go ahead and enter them to the chat box. I think I just said that, chat box, like I'm from New Jersey. Chat box. Okay, well, until somebody enters more questions, I do have a couple questions. I think I brought this up last time, and I think folks that maybe didn't hear your previous presentation at our last symposium, I think it would be good for folks to know that I believe you do host interns and have, kind of opportunities for folks to work and learn.
Yes, we can have interns. We cannot offer paid internships, but we certainly would love to be able to, if someone is interested in that, we'd love to host you as an intern, as a volunteer intern.
Probably do short term,
Yes.
Get them out working.
Right.
Great.
Right.
I had a question about, I know that tribes have always been active managers of their environments through selective burning and harvesting and other practices. How much is that considered or should be considered when planning a vegetation restoration project? Is that something that the tribes think about when they're planning their projects? Is that something other organizations should be thinking about more?
That is a really good question, and I do not have the answer for that.
I don't either.
I do know that there has become, so most of the people that are doing restoration projects are involved in fisheries habitat, although we do have some in the wildlife habitat programs and also in the range ag and forestry. And forestry does a lot of replanting, but we don't, at the nursery, we don't raise conifers. So they usually purchase their conifers from a conifer nursery.
Mhm.
So the fisheries habitat and our cultural resources department have been discussing increasing culturally sensitive species to the planting list. We're kind of on the cusp of getting that going, and then coronavirus came along and there was a big shutdown, and so that hasn't really gotten rolling again, but we're looking forward to that. And I would expect that as more culturally sensitive plants are introduced into habitat restoration projects, there would also be practices that would be involved that would enhance the success of those plants. But I can't tell you anything for certain right at this point.
Yeah, I used to work for Yakima Nation, and they did some burning of their wetland areas and some grasses. Could be hard to get that fire, that burning permit. A little easier on the reservation, probably than maybe off the reservation, but it, it isn't something I see a lot of though. Projects, probably because it is difficult to manage and maybe get that, address smoke concerns and other things. But okay, do you have plant sales? Does your nursery do plant sales?
Oh, we were going to do a plant sale year before last, and then it just got too, everything, our schedule and everything, it just got too tight. And so we said, okay, we will do it. We will plant it for next year. Well, it was 2019 that we were going to do it. We decided we couldn't. And then 2020 came along and we absolutely couldn't. So right now, in fact, we are not open to the public in the way that we used to be open. We do all of our sales by email and phone, and then we select the plants and we put them, in a place for the customers to pick them up. And so it's not nearly as much fun as it normally is, but it does help reduce contact with, between people.
If folks are interested in that, would you be the person to reach out to if they want more information on that?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a question that I missed. What are your thoughts on using non-native invasive species to outcompete, I guess, more aggressive invasive species in the short term? I haven't seen folks do that.
Well, there's a lot of stories about that. Yeah, let's see. If you look up Australia and cane toad and
well, yeah.
I mean, the problem with that is that, I realize that still is happening. That actually still is happening. We're still planting non-native forage kochia and Siberian crested wheatgrass and things like that. And I personally I don't think that's the road to go down, but I'm not in those people's position of trying to accomplish the goals that they're trying to accomplish, which I know are really hard, so like just maintaining soil. So, and we've got Russian olive too, that's a primary example of things that just did not go well. So I would be reluctant to do that, but there probably are some very few extreme situations where that would be appropriate.
Yeah, I know that non-native insects are often released that are natural predators, I guess, of non-native, like purple loosestrife and some other, stargrass or yellow star thistle, I think, and some of the other thistles.
Yeah. It's a real balancing act, and sometimes the fact that they're non-native to that area is good because that means there's going to be a winter die-off. Right. And so you don't have to worry about them becoming invasive. But at the same time, it's just, I think it's a Pandora's box is what it is. So Proceed with
It might
caution.
be good on a small experimental basis where you can control what happens.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure it's done under a controlled setting. Someone asked, do you have any specialty plants that have tribal significance that are typically not used in traditional restoration plantings? For example, wild celery, dogbane, Indian hemp. I know Colville uses Indian hemp, I believe, in plantings, but yeah, I mean, are there cultural plants that are difficult to plant or restore?
We've had a really difficult time with turpentine parsley. That's I know that's one we've just not been able to get it to germinate, and that is one that we're trying to get established at the Wanacott Wildlife Reserve down at near Umatilla. We've grown dogbane. The Wanacott area is using much more of our culturally significant plants than, for example, the riparian stream habitat. So, I mean, riparian salmon habitat, sorry. So, I mean, we do grow some plants that we don't grow on speculation. We always need orders, but we have more, we grow more than what is usually used in that project because we always have to make sure that we account for any issues that could occur during the process. And so sometimes we have things on hand, but it's not like we would always have it. It just happens to be surplus.
Are there species that you guys have successfully grown and used in projects that maybe, you know, outside of the Umatilla Reservation, folks might want to consider more that they don't typically use? I think folks are always kind of wanting to know, like maybe new species that they have, you know, haven't used traditionally.
Right.
You know, we always have like
Right.
kind of the standard 10 trees or so, you know, then plants that
Yeah.
sort of repetitively use. I'm just wondering if there's things that maybe people haven't thought of that they might consider for their project.
Well, we usually grow cascara, which oftentimes is kind of low on people's list, but it's a good tree. I mean, it's a shrubby tree, kind of a viney, shrubby, not viney, but scraggly tree. But it's really good for wildlife. Wildlife love the berries, and it belongs here. Another tree that oftentimes is not, and we have not yet successfully propagated it, although I do have a good seed source, but we just started last year and that things were so disrupted that they didn't survive. And that is white alder. And that really was much more prominent in the landscape than it is now. And it's a really a beautiful landscape tree, you know, for like your yard. And is quite versatile as far as it doesn't mind having its roots down in the water alongside a river. So that's a good one. Trying to think of any others that people don't normally. I don't know. I can't just on the spot. I just can't.
Someone asked about Gary oak. If you guys have had success growing or planting Gary oak, or have any tips about it?
Yeah, we have not grown that. We haven't been. That has not been requested of us to grow.
I think North Yakima Conservation District does have it as part of their plant sale, and also the Kittitas Environmental Education Network sells it as part of their plant sale.
Well, is that the oak that grows? Is that the oak that grows between Goldendale and Toppenish?
Yeah, and I think it also goes down to Oregon a little bit. Yeah, our native. I think it's our only native oak, I believe.
I haven't seen it in the Blue Mountains, but that doesn't mean it doesn't grow here.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it's just closer to the central. Well, we'll let folks go. Oh, somebody said to repeat the Kittitas Environmental Education Network. You can actually go on their website, and they're having their plant sale right now. They have orange globe mallow and some lots of really great native grasses. You do have to go in person to pick it up once those are available. So if you're close to Kittitas County, that's a great plant sale. I haven't seen a lot that have that as many like grasses and non-woody plants as they do flowers and such. I bought a bunch last year and they did really well. So, we'll wrap up and thank you so much, Gail, for doing this. I appreciate it. I think everybody appreciates it, and of course, do you mind sharing your email?
No, no, I don't mind at all. Okay, so it's Gail Redberg, and you have my name correctly spelled on this presentation. And then it's followed by the number 2, so just 2, at ctuir.org.
Okay, I'm going to type it into the chat box. I think I got that right.
Yes.
If you have any folks, if you have any questions at Gail, feel free to reach out to her, and also feel free to reach out to me. And again, we'll post this presentation up on YouTube hopefully next week. And I think you have also some materials you were going to share with everyone. Right. And if it's okay, we can also turn this presentation into a PDF.
Sure.
It's okay, and we can send it out when we send out the links to the video. So thanks everybody for joining us for our first lunchtime webinar that went a little after lunch, but I appreciate you guys sticking around. And thanks again.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for posting. I see lots of thank yous. I appreciate that. It's encouraging.
Yeah.
And if you email me or call me, either one, let me know that you watch this presentation so I can know kind of the things that you've already learned, and we won't cover the same material. So, okay.
All right. Did you want to post a phone number, or do you want to send that out later?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let us know.
Sure. 541-278-8525.
Okay.
And that forwards to my cell phone as well for the days that I'm working at home. So.
Okay. Well, hopefully you don't get too bombarded, but appreciate you sharing your resources with us. So, okay. Well, everybody have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us again, and also have a great weekend coming up soon. So.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.